right. Welcome everyone to another Learning Tech Talks, where I am continuing on my adventure of living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. And for those of you who may have missed the post leading up to this, or may be new to watching or listening, this today, I don't know if it's technically officially today, but today I'm celebrating 4 years of hosting this live stream, which is a little bit bizarre, actually, as I think back on that, because I can't believe it's been that long. So thanks, first of all, one, to everybody who's been here for the journey. I know some of you, probably some of you who are tuning in now, have been longtime followers of this. I just want to give a special shout out to everybody who's been here for this from the very beginning, but also to those of you who are new to it. I know the show continues to grow, and I appreciate all the feedback and input that I get from folks on this. And I continue to hear different stories along the way of how people are finding value in this. And it continues to be an evolution, which I'll talk about here. But again, thank you to the awesome community of people who have been here and supportive throughout the whole thing. So yeah, I know, boss, you're one of those long timers, and it is inconceivable where we are today. So thanks to all of you. And again, this is going to be a bit of an interactive one. I've got a lot, which is why I started a few minutes early, and I booked some extra time because I will likely go long on this. But as I get into it, for those of you who don't know, since there may be folks who are new to this, just a little bit of the history, because I want to set the table for what's ahead. And I also have some asks for those of you who are watching and listening, whether you're listening or watching live or catching this later. So for those who don't know, I originally started this as a way to help bridge the gap for professionals in the field to understand how technology was changing and how to stay up on it and where it was going and the impact that had. And it was something that formerly people were originally reaching out to me on an individual level. And as you know, if you follow any of my stuff, I'm pretty busy, and it was becoming very time intensive. And so I actually started this as a way to, one, help democratize access to me and my insights on some of this stuff, because I have a passion and a knack for this space. So that's where it started. But it's been interesting watching the show change and evolve. And if you've listened for a long time, you may have started to see some of the changes that have happened. And while it originally started purely talking with learning technology practitioners or vendors on what their technology products are, the show has continued to expand far beyond the walls of learning technology, which is a trend I'm going to talk about in terms of some of the major shifts I've observed over the years. So you'll see that some of that change was very intentional, and some of it just happens to be how the market has been moving and some of the bigger gaps that I'm seeing in the space of business technology and human experience. So some of that, but you're going to continue to see that trend. So if you originally joined the show because you were really interested in specifically learning technology, my goal as we move into the future is to preserve some of that, because it is an important factor. And I do think how we develop people and the impact technology has on that is a really important thing for people to know, but not just for learning professionals. And if you've listened to the conversations and how they've evolved a bit, that is a recognition of this greater need outside of just learning practitioners to understand that. And that's going to continue. You may have also noticed that the lineup has started to evolve and go more broadly than just learning technology companies. So I have other technology companies folding into the mix. I also have a lot of thought leaders and industry leaders who are working in similar spaces from diverse backgrounds. You may have caught the episode with the EVP and general counsel from Fender, where we were talking about how legal is changing and things like that. And I'm going to continue that trend as I look to expand the landscape of how we're really looking more broadly at the intersection of this big, business tech and human component. So that's really a plan for the future of where things are going. I continue to look for ways to evolve and adapt, and that is largely based on the folks who are listening and following along. And so I'm always open to input and feedback as we go. So please keep that coming through. I do this for the benefit of others, not for myself. So if people aren't finding benefit, then I need to know about that. And if people would like to see more, I also want to know about that. So please let me know as I continue to evolve that. The lineup for Learning Tech Talks is currently booked into May of 2024. So I keep thinking like, well, maybe the lineup will slow down and eventually it just will kind of go into obsolescence. And I just continue to be surprised by the fact the distance I get booked out just continues to grow. So I'm going to have to either figure out how to accommodate that moving forward, or we'll have to get creative. So if you have ideas on that, please let me know. Cause sometimes people are like, hey, when can I get on? And it's always interesting the reactions I get when I tell them when the next available opening is. So that gets me to the next section of an ask that I would ask from anybody who's watching or listening as I look to take Learning Tech Talks. And we'll see if the name stays the same. I don't know. I haven't decided what that's going to look like. But whatever this is that I do, where this is going in 2024 and beyond, but I need your help with this. So what I would ask is, first of all, if this is something that you enjoy and find value in, this is a live stream, but it's also a podcast. I know a lot of people who are going to listen to this and watch it may listen to it on their favorite podcast streaming app or somewhere else. If you do, or if you happen to sometimes, if you could give it a rating and a review, that would be super helpful for me as I continue to grow it. Also, if you'd tell somebody, that would be fantastic. And I would appreciate it greatly if you let someone know, hey, this is a really helpful show, might find benefit to it. And if you want to go a level above it, if you find a specific session particularly helpful, go ahead and share it with them. So that's my ask. I'm very bad at asking for help. Normally, I don't like to do that, but I thought, you know what? I'm celebrating 4 years. I've been doing this for a while. I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. So I suppose a little plug for an ask from those of you who are actually consuming it may not hurt. But anyway, it's more of an ask, not a demand. So anything you can do to help would be great. So that's really the intro of where things are going, and what you can expect to see. Which now brings me to what I want to kick it off with is some of the biggest macro trends and shifts that I've been seeing that are then going to go into some of the more specific ones. So one of the ones that I just want to hit on that's been really interesting, and I talked about this, that when I started the show, it was pre-pandemic. And at the time, one of the biggest conversation points that was happening was the learning experience platform. That was the big boom of we need to create the single pane of glass for learning for everyone. And while I won't say that that's completely died, there's been a big shift as a lot has changed. LMSs have become more indistinguishable from LXPs. And there's an even bigger trend happening, which is there's a much greater integration across workplace technology. And my prediction on this is it's only going to become even bigger. The need for us to integrate and meet people where they are is only going to rise. And we're continuing to see that. I continue to see that in consumer behavior, and I also see it in employee behavior. And what that means is, to the vendors I know who are listening, the need to focus on integration and figure out how can we stop competing to be the destination people come to, and be willing to become the plumbing and electrical in the workforce experience, and say, I don't need to be on stage in the spotlight in order to be valuable and meaningful. And recognize that ultimately people are overwhelmed, they're busy, they're exhausted, they are struggling right now, and trying to compete for their attention for something that they're just trying to get their jobs done and grow as professionals is not the best use of our time and resources. And I think that's something that we all can start to look at, whether it's the technology or even our approaches to learning. Parading around trying to grab people's attention is actually in many ways something that is exhausting, folks. And that's a shift that I've seen even in the maturity of the technology. Before it was very much, when I started this 4 years ago, one of the major goals of everyone was, how do we get everyone coming to our destination and engaging with our wares and what we're doing? And there has been a slow recognition by the business and by the industry of saying, maybe that's not the best path. And I think that's a really positive shift, one that I think we should and continue to move forward. That's only been accelerated by some of the technological advancements we've seen over the past year. So that's a big macro trend that I think we're going to see. Now, this was something that before was considered as, was this a consolidation of the tech? And I'd be careful of tagging it as that, because having talked to hundreds of vendors every year, I would not say the technology stack is consolidating. I really wouldn't. There are areas of it that I've seen massive consolidation. There are components of it that I think are starting to fold together where it's made sense. Yet I've also seen mass diversification of specialty products and specialty tools. So that's where this whole idea that everything's going to consolidate into the all-in-one, to me, I'm not seeing that. And it's not something that I think would be valuable, because over the years, what I've seen is when somebody tries to be everything to everybody, you're pretty much nothing to nobody. I mean, you just really end up meeting nobody's needs because you can't really sustain the kind of innovation required to be top of mind for folks. So that's where I would say, while I'm seeing this convergence of, hey, we need to unify and fall into the plumbing and electric, it's not necessarily going so we can buy one platform and that's it. I would say it's quite the opposite. The ecosystems are becoming more complex, albeit in different ways. And I think that's a push that we'll continue to see. To your point, boss, I do agree that some of the niche solutions are. Actually, I've got some interesting thoughts on this. I actually am seeing a lot of new things sparking up, but they're sparking up in new capabilities and categories that didn't exist before. What I would agree that the niche solutions are slowing down is there have been seasons, and the pandemic was a perfect season of this, where COVID hit, everybody went remote, and suddenly there were a bajillion virtual engagement platforms or a bajillion community tools or a bajillion one of these. And there was this surge of just products that got thrown onto the market. But if you actually looked across the landscape, a lot of them were very similar to each other. And what I think I've observed is that the wheat has separated from the chaff on this one. That has consolidated down. We've seen a lot of these. People have recognized there's market saturation in some of these air quote niche markets that really actually had a sizable number of tools in there. What I continue to see, which is actually really encouraging to me in a lot of the conversations I have, is there are still a lot of new innovations in different areas where you went, whoa, where did you come up with that? That is something that currently categorically does not exist today, or it's something that there are no other competitors on the market. I can actually think of a number of vendors right now coming to mind, not even just specifically to learning, that are doing something that really no one else is doing. Now, I will say it's stagnated a little bit, and I think this has to do with the investment market from the VCs and how that has changed. If you talk to people who are in the tech space, there has been a bit of a slowdown from venture investments, which has its effect on things. But I continue to be encouraged by some of the innovation that continues to spark up. But I do agree there has been a thinning of the herd in many regards. But to me, that was a natural occurrence because we went through almost this hyper growth of solutions that blew up and everybody was creating something. And I just think back to a couple of years where I would be on calls talking to vendors and they would go, I have this great idea. And they would pitch it to me and I would go, you and 37 other people I've talked to in the last week who saw this unique market, which isn't really that unique anymore. So I think that's some of the trends that I'm seeing from the vantage point that I'm sitting on. But again, always open to insights from other folks who are also doing some things. So boss, thanks for chiming in. And I would encourage everybody who's on, if you've got thoughts along the way, feel free to jump in. I love taking the comments interactively. Something else that's been interesting on a macro trend, which isn't surprising, and it is. So I started the show, pandemic hit, whole world blew up, everything went digital. And that goes to what I just talked about in terms of market dynamics with some of these solutions that popped up. The whole world went digital almost on steroids. And then there was this, because it was such an urgent rush to do this, there wasn't always the thought and intention put into how it was done. It was just, it had to get done. And that's not a fault or throwing shade on anybody. In some regards, some of this stuff just had to happen. And as a result, there were things that got missed. and experience degraded. And some stuff just flat out sucked because it got thrown into this new world so quickly. I'm now seeing things start to swing back into a more, what I would say, healthy mixed approach with some opportunities. There is a little bit of the nostalgia kicking in and continuing to kick in, but I've actually almost seen that fully right size now. So we went full digital, things slowed down. People suddenly craved, oh, I just wish things could go back to the way they were. And then it was interesting to observe things start to swing back to the way they were. And then people went, I guess this wasn't really all that great in the first place. So that recognition started setting in, and it has left us where I see us now, which is almost in this, okay, the way we used to do it wasn't as great as we thought it was. The hyper shift to this extreme spectrum wasn't quite as valuable as we thought, and we missed some things. So then we tried to go back. It didn't really work. We recognized the world had changed and there was no going back. So now we're in this strange liminal space. And believe it or not, a lot of people mistake me and think I'm anti-in-person, which I'm not. But what I'm seeing now is, and I will say, this is a skill opportunity that the industry and just people in general need to figure out, is truly hybrid experience. I am all for maximizing the possibilities of in-person interactions when it works, while at the same time recognizing when it works is almost never going to be universal for everyone. And so how do we find this sweet spot of saying, yeah, let's leverage this to the nth degree while recognizing there will be exceptions, and technology, the benefit of where technology has come is we now can actually say, and that's okay. If you can't make it, you don't have to either be completely left out and ignored or given a lunchbox version of the steak dinner. And to me, that's a fantastic place for us to be. I think what I'm observing is our skills still need to catch up with that. And that's not just us. People in general need to catch up. Businesses need to catch up with that. Then there's also just the comfort level with that. We're in this weird space where we haven't quite figured it out yet. And it's been very interesting over 4 years to have watched that whole thing swing through multiple swings of the pendulum and now kind of come back into this middle ground, which I think is probably the healthiest place for us to be. But it's not without opportunity, which leads me to some of the biggest opportunities I continue to see and have seen over the last few years. So one of the ones, and you would probably guess, AI will be a heavy talking point in this conversation. However, it's not going to be a big segment of it. I really see it as a red thread that's going to fit throughout the conversation, and I'll talk more about that why. But the reality is, one of the biggest opportunities I've seen, especially as of recently, and this is not new. So for some folks who are thinking this boomed, AI is going to massively disrupt our field, like it's going to massively disrupt a lot of just things in general. So we do need to upgrade and we need to upskill in these areas, but in a weird way. Not in a weird way, this actually is very predictable, in my opinion, in terms of having watched how this played out. This was coming for a long time. The technology was building up to this day. We're now here, and we're only in the beginning of it with a long ways to go yet. But what's interesting about this is where it's forcing us to upgrade is actually on our human and interpersonal skills, which is a bit of a paradox because one might naturally think the need to upgrade because of technological advancement would be to upgrade in the technology, which there is a component of that. Yet the biggest opportunity is often this technology is now moving at a pace where if we aren't upgrading and focusing on the human and interpersonal components of what we do, we actually are becoming a bottleneck to our organizations, and they can actually better meet their needs more quickly and relatively accurately through other channels. And I think that's going to be one of the things that, having watched us over the past years, because this isn't just something that started at the end of 2022, we saw similar things happen with the pandemic. And some of the lessons we learned as we went into this hyper shift into digital mode was we didn't take the time to evaluate and account for the human and interpersonal components of that. And how do we do that well in the digital world? And that's actually what led, I think, largely to the almost rubber band effect as people snapped back and went, well, wait a minute, we can't completely abandon all of this. Something else that I continue to see as an opportunity, not only in the technology that we're seeing, but also in the industry as a whole, is we are still way too overly focused on the knowledge acquisition component of learning, which is too bad because the capability and the potential for technology to get us out of that pothole is at a maturity level that we can. The excuse of, well, there's just no way, it's not scalable, we don't have the resources, that excuse has gone the way of the dinosaurs. And we have an opportunity to catch up and do more in this, because we can do more than just deliver more interesting, more personalized content to be consumed. We can do a lot more with that. And while I think this is where it's gotten better, how we're doing it, I'm seeing significant improvements in the way we develop content, the kind of content we create, the speed at which we create content, which are all good things. We are doing another good thing that I think is an opportunity, continues to be an opportunity, goes back to what I said before, of not trying to get people to come to us to find that, but to bring it to them where they are. That's still an area that continues to be an opportunity. But I think one of the biggest ones that even supersedes that is there's still just way too much of a focus on building people's knowledge set and not translating that over to skills, which gets to, there's a lot of talk about 70-20-10 and a lot of talk about, oh, we need learning in the flow of work and on the job and how we do that. But we still put way too much emphasis on the 10. And what I just said before of the knowledge acquisition piece is part of it, but it's only one part of it. So there is, yes, I would say an overall trend that over the last 4 years, I've still seen a heavy emphasis on, hey, how do we create better content, faster content, more personalized content to be consumed, which to me is that 10%. But also, even when we start stretching outside of the content and moving into the skill side of the actual application, all of this, most of our resources are still channeled on the 10% of that. And to give an example of this, I've seen really great examples of cohort style programs start to spin up, especially in the post world of pandemic, where we said people still need human connection. They need connectivity with one another. So how do we do that well? And I think we've seen community and cohort style learning build up. But to me, in many regards, this is still the 10. And so where we're evolving and doing a better job of starting to say, yeah, we're going beyond just consumption and acquisition of knowledge to problem solving, discussion, community, collaboration, we're still looking at it through the lens of, in the 10% that we own, instead of saying, how do we actually carry that change forward? How are we equipping people to facilitate and lead that learning on their own with maybe support from the sidelines, but not us directly? And I think some of that comes from an area of being afraid that, well, if we let go, will there be enough for us? I think this comes from a bit of a scarcity mindset that if we let go and we teach the workforce how to develop themselves and we equip them to do the learning on their own, won't that naturally lead to them going, well, what do we have you here for? And I think that's a mindset that we need to shift, because we're missing opportunity and we're missing the chance to actually equip people. The reality is, having done this my entire career, there is no day I see us ever getting to a point where we've solved all the problems and someone goes, there's really no value in what L&D has to offer anymore. I don't see a world where that happens unless we choose to remain complacent. But so long as we're staying ahead of this, being forward thinking about where do people need to be? How are things changing? To give a good example of this, let's say pre-pandemic, we had nailed skills in an organization. Let's say an L&D organization had nailed skill development for the company everywhere and had done it in a 70-20-10 mindset where they had equipped everybody to go, you don't even need us anymore. We have built ourselves into obsolescence. The pandemic hit, it created a whole new set of opportunities for L&D to lead the charge and say, the way people are going to have to do this now has fundamentally shifted. The rules have changed for the game. We have to be there to figure out what that looks like so we can prepare and equip the workforce. And I use that as an example to highlight sometimes what contributes to, well, but if we give away too much, eventually people will stop coming to us. My experience over and over and over and over again is there is an abundance of things to give, and there are always new opportunities and new challenges that will present themselves. And this fear of, well, but if we let them do it, they won't do it quite right, and maybe they won't need us anymore and they won't come back, is actually quite the opposite. I've found over the years, the more I give away, the more I equip others to do things on their own, the more they come back and go, we're now faced with a new set of challenges. You were the one that helped build the framework and the scaffold that helped us get through the last one. Can you do it again? And I think that's where, as I look at not only us transitioning from, okay, how do we go from building more passive knowledge consumption to active application and learning? How then also do we start to make this shift to, we're now equipping you to do the talent development. We're equipping employees to be talent developers, to be learning professionals, instead of going, well, we need learning to be the ones to always do that. And I think that's an opportunity area that we can continue to make. This is one I don't see us making as much progress on as I would like to see. And I think some of that largely comes from this fear of the uncertainty of, well, will there be enough left for us? And I think AI has only exacerbated that, because there is this fear of, well, now AI is doing things that we used to do. So will we reach a point where people say, I don't need that anymore? And I just don't see that unless we adopt complacency, which is a risk for everyone, not just our field. The other one is there's a lot. So I'll close that one out. The other biggest opportunity, macro scale, is there is still a lot of talk about skills. There is still very little progress on the actual connection of skills to the work. It's happening in pockets. It's happening in certain areas, but the narrative and the lingo and talking about this as a trend that organizations are doing and learning organizations are trying to solve is largely still platitudes. It's not necessarily getting the traction that it should. Now, to be fair, this is largely because connecting skills to work is far bigger than learning and an L&D function. It's far bigger than an HR function. This is an enterprise function, which is why becoming a skills-based organization is in many companies a board level priority for the organization. It's not something that any one person owns, which is great, and it's challenging at the same time, because I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing so little progress is everybody knows it's important. Nobody's really clear on who's on first and who's going to do what and how this whole thing is going to play out. So this is going to be something that as we look at the future over the next few years, and this is to anybody listening, regardless of what business function you sit in, there is a much greater need for us to work cross-functionally, to work outside of boundary lines, to not, again, going back to the scarcity mindset, to not try and hold tightly to what we think we own because we're afraid if someone else contributes, somehow it'll be taken from us. There's far too many big problems ahead of us to solve for us to be concerned about defending our own territory and being afraid that someone might land grab something that we have that really belongs to us that they shouldn't do. There are far more problems to solve than any organization is capable of. And if anything, this is where what's coming with artificial intelligence, to me, is one of the brightest lights coming into the spaces. To me, it's the only way we make any progress. The capacity on human potential cannot keep up with the pace. And artificial intelligence, to me, is the only thing that will give us enough nitro in the tank to actually boost us to a point where we may actually have a hope of catching up, potentially even getting ahead if we're really smart about it. Okay, so we're 30 minutes in, and I've only hit the intro and the macro shifts. So let's see how far we go into it. Like I said, on the AI conversation, I said, you're going to hear me talk about this throughout, But like many conversations I have about AI, I had a recent conversation with someone who was saying, I'm trying to figure out where best to apply AI. And my response back to that was, I would actually encourage you to stop and go back to the drawing board and say, what are the biggest problems I'm trying to solve? And then come back to me. And then I can help you understand where AI may be able to help with that. So I don't really want to sit and talk about AI as a thing, because as far as I'm concerned, AI now, even where it hasn't quite yet made it, will become the red thread. Shout out to Danny and Stacia. Will become the red thread of everything. It will be threaded throughout anything we do, everything we do. It will be an integral part of our work, of the tools we use, of the way work gets done. So asking the question, what's AI going to do? What are the biggest trends in AI? To me is actually putting us in a box. The limitations of AI is our creativity, and that's really the only cap to it. So if you're stuck wondering what to do with AI, I would actually encourage everybody to go back to the drawing board and say, well, where am I stuck? What are the things I'm stuck with? And then let's go from there. So one area I want to focus a little bit on is the skills topic. I get that skills, and this again goes to some of the reflections and things I'm seeing. I understand the complexity of trying to address skills. It's something I myself wrestle with on a regular basis because it's not something we can really fully own. But the excuses for not being skills focused are quickly diminishing, even in areas where you go, well, it's bigger than just us. I'm continuing to see, and this goes back to Boss, your earlier comment on, are there less niche solutions? I would say no. Are there more really unique solutions popping up that I go, wow, I haven't heard of somebody actually doing that, which is really unique. There are tools that are actually starting to specialize in analyzing skills and connecting those skills to business problems so that you can start to identify where are there gaps in the workforce and what do they need to do to close those gaps. And that is something that can be owned in the silo of L&D. So even if you're in an organization where you say, well, but skills is maybe talent management, or skills is part of workforce planning, or it's part of the business function. Yes. And there are enough technology platforms that are becoming democratized to a point where you can actually start to explore, listen, maybe I can't solve this for the enterprise, but I know I'm tasked with solving this skill gap for this problem. Could I be looking at technology that can quickly help me diagnose let's do a rapid assessment of what is the current skill set of the people who are being targeted by this? What gaps do they actually have? And what are the best solutions they need to close that gap? And how can we use artificial intelligence to automate that? Because that level of personalization has historically been unattainable. It just really has, unless you were and honestly, even in organizations that had the financial and people resources to do it, you couldn't get people's attention long enough to actually pull it together. And I think this is where artificial intelligence is really changing the skills game, because we can do rapid analysis of where do people sit, where do those gaps lie, and what available resources do we have that can help close it so that we can then post measure, did the gap close? And to me, this is something that is still vastly underutilized, going back to it's one of the greatest opportunities I see and continue to see over the entire space of workforce tech, because this isn't, again, just a learning problem. Skills especially is a business problem. And that's something that not enough technologies are actually starting to lean into, whether it's learning or workplace tech, of saying, what are you really trying to do? What do you need to be able to accomplish that? Hey, here's where you're falling short, and this will close that gap for you. And the capabilities there. So anybody who says, well, we just can't, there's just no way we can do it, having had these conversations and seeing what it is far more accessible, and it doesn't require some massive enterprise system implementation to pull off. So I'm actually seeing, going to the skills one, I'm actually seeing small to medium-sized organizations leapfrog some of the big enterprises who are stuck in the bureaucracy of the way things have always been done, because they're tapping into some of this and going, you know what, we don't actually have to go through these nice phases that historically you've had to go through to reach a level of maturity to get there. Instead, we can go, hey, these new tools and techs are here. We can actually just jump over all the messy middle. Let's just skip the messy middle and go right to the end. So I'll stop there on the skills piece. Something else that's been interesting to observe that really didn't, I will say this, it still doesn't speak well from a stage because I don't know, it doesn't have the flashy, cool appeal that some of the other stuff does. But there has been a massive rise in learning operations. And you will find in this session, I'm not going to mention vendors because I don't want it to seem like I'm biased towards anyone, because I'm not. But there has been this greater recognition that the way we run our functions, and to be fair, this is not just learning. This is every business function. I am watching an overall workforce trend that organizations are recognizing the way they run their operation is actually what's determining their bar for success. Now, you may hear that and go, duh. However, historically, it's one of the things where people never have time to get to that, to do the self-reflection and analysis on how do we actually get work done in our function? And again, not limited to learning and development. I think a lot of organizations, what I've seen in talking with business leaders and folks from around the world is there's this greater recognition. Hey, you know what? Maybe we need to look in the mirror and clean up our kitchen before we start figuring out how to plan a 5-star banquet. Like I said, though, this topic is not necessarily always a fun one to dig into. There's always other things we can do to get distracted. But the nice thing that I'm seeing from a tech standpoint is this recognition is starting to drive tech companies to recognize, hey, this is an actual opportunity area in industries. And the specialization of helping people automate, streamline, and focus on internal operations is actually maybe something, one, for tech companies, they're recognizing, hey, there's actually money in this. So maybe if we do it and we do it right, there actually is a viable business model here, which I hope this trend continues, because the number of times, even in my own shops over the years, where I've been frustrated by our ability to achieve a certain threshold, only to find out, well, that's because you're running a messy ship. You know, the inmates are running the asylum and you're wondering why you don't have a well-run asylum. Like, well, that's a trend that I'm seeing move. And the nice thing is there's now, in the past, if you recognize this and wanted to do something about it, you really had to be MacGyver. You had to be MacGyver and really good with paper clips and rubber bands and Elmer's glue to try and figure out what to do to solve it. And that has shifted as more tools and platforms are starting to recognize, you know what? We actually need to provide people with the specialized support to run an effective operations and to think more like a business operator than whatever siloed function you happen to be running. And I think that's a positive trend. I hope to see that continue to pick up, because in many ways it was forced. But once you start getting into, sometimes the hard times are what force you to dig into these things that you would rather set on the back burner and go, I don't really want to think about that. And I think we've gone through some really hard times over the past few years, which has forced organizations to go, where do we clean up? Where do we get lean? Where do we focus on the most important things? My hope and message to people who watch and listen to this is, as we get into better times, don't take your eye off that ball. Don't get complacent and go, all right, yeah, we did that. We did the cleanup. I'm sure we're good now. Now I'm going to let that fall back into back burner mode, because what you're doing is putting yourself into a box where you're capping yourself based on your potential of your internal operations. Something else, all right, next one up is virtual experience. So I mentioned the overall macro trend I've observed over the last 4 years of, this surgence of everybody's remote. So everything was digital and virtual. And then it was this nostalgia. Let's pull everything back. Then people came back and went, it actually wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And now we're in this kind of awkward liminal state. What's been interesting to watch the virtual space, and boss, this gets back to your comment about the niche solution. There was this surgent to get virtual and digital right, but it was all done so fast that everybody was just making it to the end of the day. And in many regards, I would actually say we've taken our eye off the ball in improving how we do things virtually, which to me is extremely disappointing given the fact that, and I think what fueled this was we swung the pendulum back a bit and people went, I just can't wait to get back together and put that virtual stuff behind us. And so that led to this like, yeah, so we don't really need to keep prioritizing getting that right because we'll go back and not have to worry about that so much. And the problem is now as things are going back to, well, maybe we'll get together sometimes, but not consistently. And there's always going to be someone who's remote. We've actually really missed the opportunity for us to continue driving our virtual experience skills. And again, this is not just an L&D thing. I see this in people's ability to run virtual meetings well. I see this in people delivering virtual events well. We started to really make some positive momentum in there. And I was really encouraged by it, going, hey, you know what? Great when the pendulum comes back and we start doing things in person again. I'm looking forward to those days. Yet, I also look forward to the fact I don't have to count on, yeah, but if there's a virtual one, it's going to kind of suck. And unfortunately, we were making really good progress on that. And it seems like as a whole, our eye came off the ball when it was like, yeah, good enough, which is really disappointing because the technology, I saw it both on the technology space and the resource and skill upgrading space. We all just kind of went, I think we've gone far enough with it. And I think we can go so much further. I don't know about anybody else, but I still, when I attend virtual meetings or I attend virtual events, I go, there's still a lot of room for improvement here. And we can do so much better. And as the expectation of truly hybrid experience, I'm not even going to say hybrid learning, hybrid experience of regardless of where you are, you should still have a first-class experience. There is so much room for improvement. And going back to the red thread of AI, this is a huge opportunity area that I see for AI, because one of the things that I think consistently makes people struggle to upskill in virtual delivery of anything, meetings, anything like that, is the fact there's just a lot more going on. I mean, I just think about, myself when I'm running a virtual meeting, even right now as I'm doing this, my daughter's texting me, asking me if I can turn off a filter that I have going. And so there's just a lot more going on. There's comments coming in, there's people asking questions, there's things like that that make it harder, which AI is actually fantastic for assisting with, because it's actually able to take on some of those robotic things like monitoring people's interaction and listening to the conversation and seeing, hey, what's really being discussed? Are there some things that we should surface to the top? As an example, could we use AI to monitor chat threads? I think of the upcoming microlearning conference that's coming. By the way, if you're not registered, check it out. But that chat feed is insane. It is almost impossible hosting that thing to keep up on things. AI would be a fantastic tool to look at what are the trends in these massive things and then surface to a facilitator. What are the most common things coming up? What are some of the biggest questions people are discussing in the chat to make it more seamless? And I think that's where there, to me, continues to be massive opportunity. I think we took our foot off the gas in terms of virtual experience as a whole, not just as learning, as a whole. We've kind of said, yeah, that's good enough. And I think we can do so much better. Boss, good question here. Yeah. So that's the thing. Hybrid experience has always been a passion, even before it was a cool thing. I remember back in my days of running global teams before the pandemic was a thing and carrying around a little USB webcam on a little tripod that I would bring to meetings because I knew there was global distribution and not everybody could be in the room. And so we would have this thing up and people thought I was a bit nuts. And my viewpoint was always, I'm here and we're here, but not everybody is. And so there was this greater recognition. But I would agree with you, boss. We've always kind of ignored this inclusivity. And there was always this, well, if you're on the outside, it's a second-class experience. And again, it's disappointing because we can do so much better and technology can only take us to another level. So I hope that we can put our foot back on the gas and that we can say, you know what, hybrid is here to stay. We can never count on anybody ever being in any particular location at any point. And that is just reality. And my prediction is that's not going to change at all. If anything, that's only going to get bigger. So then also, how do we figure out where are people that are in proximity to each other? How do we rapidly stand that up so we can maximize the opportunities where people are connected? Because I see this now. I talk to people where they're like, I'm in the same office. I don't even know who's in the office because it's such a scatter shot of who's here on what days and whatever. So even when they're in the office, I hear of people who are attending things virtually because they're like, well, I didn't know there were 3 people who are in the building just down from me because now the office environment is so scattered. So we have to solve for this. We're going to get to a day, and everybody knows I've got a bunch of little kids, and I talk about this. They're probably going to tell me when they get older how much they were annoyed by how much Dad talked about this stuff. But I talk about the fact that they're probably going to think it's strange that we ever at one point in time cared about where people were. And I think we need to get ahead of that. We have an opportunity to get ahead of it, and we've taken our foot off the gas. So I'll stop there on the virtual experience, but all that to say, I think there's still massive room for opportunity in AI that I'm not seeing, even in the really common virtual platforms that I go, why are we not leveraging AI more here? Why are we not doing more to make a more seamless and personalized experience in real time? And there are a handful that are leveraging watching the conversation dynamics and providing real-time feedback to people so they know, hey, you're talking too much, or this person hasn't said anything. Be sure to engage them. But there's so much more that we could be doing with it that I think is getting missed. I want to talk about adaptive learning because in some ways, adaptive learning has largely stayed the same because it was already pretty good. So when I think of adaptive, there's different categories. And so when I think of one kind of adaptive is this truly dynamic experience from a knowledge acquisition that is consistently pulsing you along the way and seeing where you're at, testing your confidence and your knowledge and seeing if you're, and I would say that was pretty mature. Even when I first got into the space, that's where when people were like, oh, AI, this new thing that came, I'm like, AI has been doing crazy stuff since before I was born. So in some ways, adaptive learning is very consistent, and there have been marginal improvements over that, even though it's vastly underutilized. So in some ways, I'm seeing that. But where I would say adaptive from a broader spectrum of true personalization, to me, that still continues to be a massive area of opportunity. Now, some of this goes back to we're still way too over-indexed on knowledge acquisition. And so a lot of when we hear talk about adaptive learning, we're talking about ways to creatively recommend or serve up new content opportunities for people. And again, I'm not throwing shade on that, saying that's a bad thing. There's some real value in helping people cut through the noise of these massive ecosystems of stuff and going, I don't even know what's a priority, to be able to say, hey, based on what you do, based on what you're looking to do, this might be relevant to you. I think there's some real value to that. But I think we can go further than that. And this goes back to some of the broader conversations we need to have, why we need to get outside of our silos and interact with our business partners and our other HR partners, and why we just as organizations need to work better together around what's really going on with work. And we need to deconstruct work and understand what really goes into this so that people can start to not only just personalize what's next up in their learning feed or their news feed, but that people can start to see, here's what I'm really trying to do. Here's what would make me more excited to get out of bed in the morning and go to work. Here are some practical things that you can do, like people you could meet, tasks you could work on, things that you could do to actually build the ability to make that move. And I think this is the kind of adaptive learning that goes way beyond a personalized content experience that continues to, grow. The other thing that I would say with this, to me, the next generation of adaptive learning, like I said, to me, the knowledge acquisition component of adaptive learning is relatively mature. And I've only seen over the last 4 years some relatively marginal improvements in it, which if you were so don't mistake the fact that I've only seen marginal improvements as saying we as an industry or in companies are doing a phenomenal job of leveraging it. Those are two very different things. Okay. Just because the tech is there and we can do it is very different from it's a common practice. And if you talk to the average person and you say, hey, are you getting personalized? Do you feel like the knowledge you're growing is personalized to you? I think almost overwhelmingly you'd get the answer of like, no, I don't. So I wouldn't say we've adopted and implemented this well, but in terms of the tech advancement, in many regards, it's stabilized. To me, the next generation of personalized learning is active learning. We have only begun to see the beginning of this, and the intersection of generative AI and immersive technology, we have not even chipped off the tip of this iceberg yet. And that is something that I'm excited to see. And I hope others start to catch on to this because the tech is still lacking here. I see a vast lack of technology that is actually specializing in active learning. And I also don't necessarily see people really prioritizing that in their organizations and going, no, we need to actually focus on creating active opportunities, whether that's getting people doing real work that's doing it or creating simulation type things and practices where they can actually practice building some of these skills. The hardware, I will admit, okay, when it comes to immersive tech, if you're listening to this component and you're saying active learning is the next generation, I agree that the hardware is still a bit immature. But that's irrelevant to where the technology is today, because the technology, mobile and desktop, is more than mature enough, and it's widely available, it's widely affordable, and it's widely accessible to people. So a lot of the excuses I run into from people on why we're not doing active learning and why people aren't doing this, both from consumers and from talent developers, which could be formal learning professionals or it's just this like, well, it's hard. I can't really do it. I don't really know where I would go about doing that. That excuse is dying quickly. Now, again, huge opportunity to the tech folks out there who are going, hey, where could I lean in and get in front of some of the trends? To me, this is a big one. But to me, the next generation of this is active learning and moving beyond personalizing development around content and knowledge acquisition and truly personalizing, hey, your skill journey, how you develop skills, what your career pathway looks like. We're actually going to prepare you for things you didn't even know were possible. And we're not just going to tell you about it. We're going to show you so you can get into it. And you don't have to go through that experience of, yeah, I took that job. It really sucked. I liked this part of it, but I would now have written off that whole industry because of the bad experience I had. We're going to get to a point in the next few years where I predict people are going to be able to, but that's largely dependent on us, our innovation, and our creativity. And yes, we need the tech to do it, but I can tell you right now, having seen the technology and talking to some of these stealth companies that are playing with stuff, it's there. So the excuse of we can't, or it's not scalable, or it's unaffordable, it's not the case. It's a matter of figuring out how do you get mind share and market share. And this goes back to one of the biggest opportunities, I think, for businesses as a whole is to think differently about what developing employees means and what that looks like. And that's not just an L&D problem. That's a business problem. We need to figure out how to change mindsets around what growth and development and personalizing that to each individual, and how do we actually leverage identifying the best in people and leveraging that within an organization and using technology to do it. That's just something that is just a massive opportunity across the board. I guess I did my massive opportunities before, but I skipped that one. So let me transition to some of the things I've observed about learning in the flow. I know, Josh, you probably won't listen to this, but Burson was famously quoted for, saying learning in the flow of work is going to be the next big thing. There is a greater recognition that it should be a priority. Going back to one of the macro trends that I'm seeing, there's still so much room for improvement here. And I think the way it's being executed and even some of the innovation that's happening isn't happening in the right way. So there's still a lot of like land grabbing for people's attention. Still an emphasis on, okay, we're learning in the flow of work. We have a Microsoft Teams plugin now, or we're integrating into Slack, or we're now making our LMS show things in our company news feed. Better. And that's where I'm careful to say, I don't want to throw shade on it and say that's not good. It is good. It's definitely good and better than assuming people are, sending out a newsletter telling everybody go check out the LMS and see what's there. But going back to this personalization of really helping people understand what it is they need to accomplish and giving them the tools and equipping them to be able to figure that out, there is so much room for improvement. And again, this is the next generation is active learning. And to me, this is where I'm watching what's happening with wearable technology. I'm watching what's happening with the analytics and how generative AI is starting to mature and what it can do as it's starting to make sense of data and the speed at which it can make sense of data, which really is the underpinning of what's so valuable about this, is it can start to provide nudges and insights to people around, here's what you're trying to do. Here's actually a better pathway to do it, or here's something you can do to improve on that. That is still a black hole from my observations from both the tech and just the business readiness to think that way and to act that way. And I think there's so much opportunity there, and the tech is mature enough. So it's not that we couldn't do it. It's not that the capability is not there. It's a matter of actually getting, and this is where it's going to require a synergy between the vendor industry and organizations as a whole. Because if organizations don't make this shift from a mindset and don't prioritize it, no vendor, there's not government funding for orphan talent development initiatives like there is pharmaceutical products. There's nobody out there going like, hey, can we just get government grant? I mean, maybe there is, and I just don't know about it, but certainly within organizations, I don't know a lot of L&D practitioners familiar with channels of getting funding to do these really wildly creative things that's then going to get vendors to go, hey, there's enough capital in here to invest in the kinds of technologies that people are going to use. So we need this convergence of, and this is why I'm so big. I started this show to close the gap and end the middle school awkward dance of vendors and practitioners being on opposite ends of the dance floor and say, we got to get together and solve this big problem. Because to me, active learning and learning in the flow, truly learning in the flow, not just distracting you to give you something to distract your attention on something someone else thinks is important, but to actually say, I know you need to do this. Here's what you need to do this. Do you need a simulated environment so that you feel safe doing it? Or are you ready to just do it without the training wheels? That is going to require a convergence of practitioners and vendors to say, we need to work together on solving for this. Because if there's no money in it, the vendors aren't going to do it. If the vendors aren't ready, the practitioners can't. And the tech is there. The tech is absolutely there if we're ready to harness it. And this goes back to one of my earlier statements of the only limitation on the current state of technology is your imagination. It really is. So if there's something you're trying to do, it can be done. Now, whether it's feasible right now based on maturity of things, that's a different conversation, but it can be done. So that's where I'm seeing continued. I'm really happy to see things like digital adoption going mainstream. I don't know that every L&D organization is there, but I'm seeing more and more organizations recognizing, hey, you know what? Talk about learning in the flow of work. People are trying to get something done. And you know what? Maybe we don't even need them to learn it. Maybe we just need to help them figure out how to do it so they can get back to their real job and the things that they need to do. It's also where nudging is continuing to grow, of recognizing like, hey, this is the kinds of things you're trying to do. Here's the underlying skills and behaviors that you need to do to pull that off. But these are still, to me, these are orphans. They're not quite reaching the scale that I think they need to get organizational recognition and adoption and become part of core business strategy. And so if you're a learning practitioner who's saying, I wish there was a seat at the table, the seat's there. the opportunity to influence business leaders and say, talent strategy is your business strategy. And here are the ways we can make that happen. It doesn't have to be, do we choose our people or do we choose our profits? It's, we're going to do both. And here's the pathway we go about doing it. And it looks like this. And these are the kinds of investments. And here's the returns we can get for doing it. And that opportunity is there if we lean into it. Okay. Coming in, well, couple other ones that I want to touch on that'll be a little bit briefer. One big opportunity area that ties, in my opinion, to one of the broader ones where I've probably seen some of the biggest movement, especially in recent months, specifically in 2023, end of 2022. There's been massive enhancement to the way content creation and experience has happened. And like I said, that's a good thing. While I still would say we're far too over-indexed on it, it's good that we're improving in this area because we now can get to a point where disposable content is feasible. We can move at the pace and speed of business. It's more acceptable to say, you know what, we've got this thing. It's got a short lifeline on here. We're not going to spend 3 months doing something with it because we can now create digital content using artificial intelligence very quickly. We can accelerate our development. We can use generative AI to write drafts of our content, to create images and video. Those two, while not quite as mature as some of the actual written form, are coming on the heels. Immersive is coming right behind that. The ability to repurpose content into multimodalities where we can say, I created this thing. I also now need to turn it into a this and a this and a this. So I've got a whole suite of solutions. That is all really, really good stuff. And I think the part that's important for us to make the shift on this is that by doing this, what we need to do though, and this is the opportunity, is we need to, one, recognize that there is more than enough for us to do. So we need to stop just being the bottleneck that does this and starting to teach the rest of the world how to do this for themselves. And that needs to, again, be holding things with an open hand and not afraid of, well, but if they learn, they're going to stop coming to us. No, they won't. They won't. There's going to be new problems to solve that they're not going to be able to figure out. As long as we're staying 10 steps ahead, great. They're still going to come to us because they're going to get hit with a new ton of bricks and go, now how do I dig out of this one? And we're going to be there to go, we actually have the time and capacity to help equip you to do this because we aren't so busy doing this. But the risk we have to do, so one of the shifts is saying we need to not see ourselves as the gatekeepers of this, but how do we actually unlock this? Because there has been so much advancement in content creation and experience that we should be democratizing this to the rest of folks. We should. We should be teaching them how. We shouldn't just be handing them the keys to the Ferrari and saying, go get groceries. We should be actually teaching them to drive and teaching them how to do this. And we have the capability and the capacity to, because if we're doing content creation accurately, it should be freeing up more time for us to do some of these higher order, interpersonal, human type activities. However, our tendency, and this is something that I'm seeing that we have to watch carefully, is we can be so excited about how we're freeing up all this time by automating and improving experience. And it's so much faster. We can do this, in the click of a button, that then we just pile on more and we go, I can create all this content now and it's more personalized and it's faster and it's better. I'll just keep doing more of it instead of going, wait, I can do this. That should be freeing up time to do other things, to equip other people to do it, to all of this other stuff. And I think that's one of the watch out points that I have seen over, especially the last 12 months, that as people are starting to adopt and get excited about these new ways of creating content and experiences, one, we don't use that time to be more thoughtful and strategic with the content necessarily. And we also just use the additional time we're given to just churn out more, which at a time when the market and employees are already oversaturated with things that they can't even get their arms around, just creating more stuff because we can is not the best path forward. Might there be times where it is? Yes. Am I excited about the innovations so that when those last minute things spin up and we go, we just have to turn this around really quick to meet this need? that we can do that in a way that's not bureaucratic and we have political junk that just prevents us from actually meeting needs, I think it's fantastic. I think we just need to be really careful that we don't find ourselves in a position where we're so happy to not be busy doing this that we just create more stuff that keeps us busy instead of working on the other stuff. And this is not limited to content creation and experience. I see this happen all the time in many aspects of life where we're so Jack. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So yes, we don't always need more, and faster is not always better. And I know you're being sarcastic, Jack. So thank you for that. But I think that is really the lesson that we should all take from this is just because we can move faster doesn't mean moving faster is a good thing. And just because we can create more doesn't mean that creating more is always better. And I would encourage anyone, regardless of what field, what industry, whatever you're doing, that as we look at this acceleration of change that's happening, we almost need to take time to hit reset and go back to the drawing board and say, where are we using these tools to free up more meaningful work? Where are we using these things to help us actually solve problems rather than just throw more spaghetti at the wall in hopes that more noodles stick? That's the risk that I'm seeing many people fall into, myself included. I have to forcefully, intentionally set myself time to step back and go, wait a minute. I'm really excited, but where am I actually pulling back? And you may have noticed that in some of the things that I'm formerly doing, that I was formerly doing, that I'm actually pulling back from going, no, I'm actually going to not do that anymore. I'm actually going to change and use that time I used to do this for to do other things, which is why, if you don't know already, I spend a lot more time creating YouTube content that doesn't come to LinkedIn because there's a lot more I have to say on a lot of different things that I don't just want to saturate LinkedIn with, but YouTube has a great place to host a lot of this long form video content. And I can use AI tools to break it down and make it digestible. So again, everybody has an opportunity right now to say, where could we be doing better, not just more or faster? The other thing is with accessibility. It's better, but it's disappointing to see there's not enough of a spotlight being shined on accessibility, given how the tech has matured to a point where it can. It is largely overlooked. And with the capability of AI, this is another area where instead of just going, hey, think how much more stuff we could put out or how much faster we could put out, we could actually be going, how could we be improving the quality of what we're doing? I think of it just a good example of this. Shout out to you, JD, if you end up listening to this. But your video that you did showing people the possibilities of creating a video that is one video that can be produced in multiple languages, where the language and the face is actually speaking in the native tongue of whatever that is. That is a huge opportunity for the people I know who are leading global organizations where they go, we got this one video of the CEO, and we are very arrogant to send it out and just go, everybody consume it in English because that's what we've got. And the CEO doesn't speak any other languages, which in the past, to me, I wouldn't say that's arrogant to do that because it was like, well, it's a limitation on what we can do. We can't teach our CEO 63 languages and have him redo the video. I get that. But now the excuse of, well, so we can't is actually fading because you can. You can use AI to get his voice print, change this, and actually do this. And this isn't just a learning thing, but this is starting to say, as an organization, how are you thinking about the dynamic and diverse needs of your people and saying, let's just not produce more faster things. Let's actually recognize we got a diverse group of people out there who have a wide array of needs. And instead of saying we've got to cast the widest net, starting to say, where can technology help us to cast a personalized net for everybody? And that may be a high bar. I agree. That is a high bar to shoot for, but it's not as high as it used to be. It used to be an impossible bar. It used to be like trying to land on the sun. Now it's more like landing on the moon. And that's only going to come closer. Pretty soon it's going to be like taking an international flight to the point where we can do some of this stuff with really not any effort. And I think that's something that there should be more light focused on. And this isn't just languages. This is about different people's needs, where they are cognitively, all these different things that makes work more accessible for people, makes development more accessible, which opens opportunity for people who had less access, where there's inequality in the system. There are so many areas that we can be using technology to close those gaps. But if we don't stop just running faster and producing more, we're actually going to gloss right over them and miss the opportunities that are right in front of our face that are already there. And that's something that I'm seeing right now. The tech's there, the capability's there. And some of these tools, it's already built in. And we're so busy moving on to the next thing, we're not going, how do we actually get more out of what we did right here? Which also goes back to, interestingly, for those of you who know me a little bit, my brother and I talk a lot on Marco Polo. And we were recently talking about the trajectory of Saturday morning cartoons and how it very much relates to what we're seeing in terms of some of the macro trends I've talked about today, and how in the early days, something I've been doing with my kids is watching Disney Plus. And I told you I booked extra time. So I'm getting to the end. I can ramble a little bit, but we've recently been going back and watching some of the classic Disney cartoons, some of the classic Donald Duck, some of the classic Disney movies. And it's been interesting to watch my kids' appreciation for the quality and the intention and the purpose that went into that. And we compared that, as we were talking about this, we compared that to some of the trends we're seeing now, where there are so many sources of entertainment, and technology is allowing us to churn this stuff out so much faster that the quality isn't necessarily there. You can't sit down and really enjoy the experience the same way you could, because, well, we got to create, we're throwing so much spaghetti at the wall. We're producing so many cartoons. We're just seeing if one of them sticks. Versus if you were going to get into the one Saturday morning lineup, it better be a good cartoon, because you're capitalizing youth's attention for half an hour on their Saturday morning. And if it sucks, you might lose them. And you might lose a generation of kids. There was real stakes to be involved, versus we're seeing some of these things shift. And I think this very much ties to some of the things where we can go, hey, we might lose a generation of employees. We might lose a generation of people because we're so busy just churning out things. They suddenly don't know what's good from bad anymore, because we've just turned everything into the ether. So that's just something that I would encourage everybody, as you look forward and you're planning and you're thinking about, where do we really want to invest our time? How do we do a better job of slowing down, being intentional, and using the technology that's ahead of us to enrich experience and enrich what we're doing, and making things more meaningful and valuable to people, not just giving them more. The last one, and then I'll kind of close out, is what I've seen around data visualization and measurement. This has been on my list of opportunity areas for a very, very long time, and it continues to be. However, I will say, first, I want to say what I think is good. I am seeing more accessibility to the data that we're creating and more accessible means to get to it. But I would call that visualization over insights and analytics. I'm seeing a lot more visualization. I'm seeing a lot more emphasis on, hey, we're capturing all this data. We probably should do something with it to make it accessible to people so that they can do something with it. Unfortunately, and this is where I don't hold the vendors responsible. This goes back to earlier what I said of, hey, if our organizations and us as practitioners aren't asking more of vendors and we aren't backing it with our dollars, they're not going to do it. Because if there's not value or there's not money in what we're putting forward, they don't have the research. It takes a lot of time and innovation and money to build things. And if it's just on a pipe dream, they're not going to do it. They're not going to get orphan status workplace tech that they just get a grant to go create something because it's good for people. And so when I think about the measurement and what we can do around analytics and insights, a lot of the data we're capturing is still largely inconsequential. It tells us part of a story. It tells us a not a terribly compelling part of the story. And so even throwing heavy analytics on top of it and really diving deep, you can only go so far with it. And so I don't necessarily blame tech vendors right now and go, well, why aren't you providing better insights and analytics to things? I actually, in many regards, look in the mirror and go, where am I actually measuring and building things to capture meaningful data that can then be analyzed and insights can be pulled from? Because at the end of the day, if the only thing I'm thinking about is whether people did it or whether they consumed it, it will be almost impossible for me to ever get any meaningful analytic data. Now, like I said, there have been a lot of improvements on this. So, from a tech standpoint, the maturity is there for the technology to provide us with a lot more. With the advancements of artificial intelligence, we can start to get an overall better look into things and start to make better decisions. But going back to, I think, point number 2, the rise of learning operations, our capability is going to be capped by the way we run things. If we're designing things that aren't capturing meaningful data points, if we're not asking people to do things to actually see, are you getting better in this? If we're not providing active learning opportunities, we're actually giving them road and playground to play in, then what really can we expect from the information we get back from that? And yes, is there room for us to tap into some of our external sources for some of that data? Yes. But my observation, and goes out to business leaders as a whole, I would challenge not just learning leaders, but any leader in any organization to be asking, what data are we really even capturing? And are we clear on what we're hoping to improve when we're setting out to do something? Because I can tell you time and time and time again, how many times I've gone down a path and been involved in projects where it's not clear what we're hoping to accomplish from the get-go. And that's not just a learning thing. For the project itself, we aren't clear on what good looks like on the other side. And if we aren't clear on what good looks like on the other side, any data we capture, any insights we get out of this stuff is not really going to be telling us a meaningful story. And so going back to faster and more isn't always better, the same is true when it comes to measurement. The more data we create, the more data we capture does not necessarily correlate to better insights and analytics that we're going to get out of it. We need to be more intentional on the front end and go slow to go fast so that we can start to look at things and go, we were hoping to see this because this is the outcome we were driving to. Did we get there? And if not, why? So that data can actually tell a story. And this continues to be an opportunity area, but I don't see this as, oh, this is a gap in the tech. The tech is there. I can throw data at my my OpenAI Plus account, and I can get meaningful insights out of it if I have meaningful data and I ask it to tell me something about it. The tech is there. Even the most basic tech is there. The problem is we're capturing a lot of garbage and then trying to figure out how to make a masterpiece out of garbage. And I think that is a problem that we have to really look in the mirror and say, how do we improve that? How do we fix that? Because if we don't fix that, the tech won't save us. The tech's not going to get us there. But it's been interesting to watch because there has been over the last 4 years, I've watched a lot of the conversation drive around measurement and analytics and all this other stuff. I still will say I'm not seeing the internal movement and the internal shift in the way work and priorities happen and that actual mapping on the front end to actually see the kind of change that we should be seeing because the technology's there. Okay, I actually did make it to the end and only went, 20 minutes over. So in terms of kind of wrapping up, some concluding thoughts on this as I close out and all of this is, as I think back on some of the biggest things, there are 3 trends I think everyone should be following as you go forward. So you just heard my reflections on what I'm seeing, where I see some opportunities over the last 4 years. There again, talk to me next week. I'll probably have 3 more hours of thoughts on this, but this is where I am today. As I look, and anybody watching and listening who's going, so what are things I should be thinking about as I look out? Part of my answer to that is you need to actually do the hard work of understanding what you're trying to do. But I do think there are some common threads that I would say everyone, absolutely everybody, should be following and thinking about as we move forward. And these, if you were listening, are threaded throughout the entire conversation. One is personalization is paramount. Anything done right anymore is about meeting people where they are on their unique journey. And this is not limited to just learning. The technology has reached a state where we no longer have to cast the widest net, nor should we be. Not everything is where it needs to be, but so many things are so much further along than we actually are implementing them. And this is really an opportunity that's going to become an expectation. It's going to become an expectation from employees. It's going to become an expectation from businesses. And personalization and how you think about personalization is going to be paramount. So don't get caught up and distracted with the just do more, do faster, do better. And that is going to be a trend that everybody should be thinking about. Now, what that personalization looks like for you and the work you're doing, regardless of what field or industry you're in, is going to look a little different. And that's okay. That's totally okay. So long as what you're saying is, I am trying to figure out how to do what I am and make it more personalized to the people I'm trying to serve, because you can, and it's going to matter, especially in an AI age. It's really going to matter, going back to some of those macro trends of things are just going to get to a point where it's almost indistinguishable. And there's so much noise in the atmosphere, it's impossible to pick those things out. So the things that are going to rise to the top are the things that have discovered how to cut through and actually meet people where they are. So that's something everybody should be thinking deeply about. Another one is the digital future is human, which sounds paradoxical in nature, but it really is. As I look at all the things on a macro level that are happening over the past few years, and not even unique to AI, as I look at what happened from the day I started this show and a few months later, the pandemic hit and the whole world went upside down. While there's a rapid rise in digital technology, the wheat that's separating from the chaff is the technology that is really focusing on the critical importance of human interaction and human skills and bringing the best out of people. I've said this multiple times from the stage that your litmus test for whether you're using technology right is whether it's further humanizing people or whether it's dehumanizing them. If you're dehumanizing people through what you're doing, you're actually going down the wrong path. Now, I understand there's complexity to that, because you may say, well, dehumanizing who? The end user, the admin, there's like multiple parties involved. Well, ultimately, that is the very difficult discernment we're going to have to make as we move forward, and some of the trade-offs we're going to have to make as we figure out, well, at what point is the right balance? But ultimately, the digital future is human, and where we lean into that and where we maximize that is where we're actually going to set ourselves apart. And that's something that everybody, as they're thinking about, well, what should I be doing for next year? Where could I be leaning in? Where should I be trying to do more? Well, where are you bringing out the best in people through what you're doing? And that can happen in some very unorthodox ways. And I've seen over the past probably 10, 15 years, there are times where looking at something, you would look at it and go, well, there's just no way that this innovation or this advancement is going to further humanize it. And to me, every instance I've said, then think harder, because there's a way that you can actually make this better for everyone involved if you're doing it right. And I get the tendency is to go, we don't have time for that. They don't want to, but the long-term rewards on that investment always pay dividends. The last and fourth is for everybody. This is anybody out there. You have to upskill or risk obsolescence. You absolutely have to. Complacency is not an option. It just is not. You're either growing or you're atrophying. It's just the only way it is. And that's only going to further accelerate, which I get can be exhausting, which I created a video that launches tomorrow talking about, this will be a hot button topic for some folks, talking about learning styles. So there you go. You can mark that on your calendar. I think it launches at 1 tomorrow on YouTube. But my point with this is the need to upskill is going to be paramount for everybody, and not just learning professionals, because the way in which we demonstrate and deliver our skills is going to be changing constantly. We are going to be in a fluidic state with skills indefinitely. And so while there are underlying consistencies, and I guess this is the positive message to put in that, because it can sound overwhelming. And I know there's no shortage of stuff out there that just says everything's changing. Everything you know will be gone tomorrow. There's no consistency. And I continue, as I reflect deeply on a lot of different things, there are consistencies in this. So even as you look at your own skills and the things you're doing, There are consistencies underneath that. Again, even going back to the digital future being human, that is a constant. That will be a constant. There are skills and there are things underneath your skills that will remain consistent, but we have to continue learning and growing the different ways we're going to utilize and apply those things. And that's if you're a learning professional, that's if you're an employee in any field, that's if you're one of my kids trying to figure out, hey, how do we actually do this or that? Well, the way we do it today might look a little bit different tomorrow, but what's underneath that and the common skills that go into that are going to remain consistent. So that is the conclusion. Again, if you missed any of it, feel free to check it out. Again, my one ask that I said is, if you can, as I continue to evolve LTT, I'd ask for your help in getting the message out there and letting people know. Give it a review if you can. And I look forward to continuing this on. Like I said, the lineup for this is booked well into May of 2024. So I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. To me, this is one of those important works that continues to add value. And as long as it's adding value, I will continue to find time to do it. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, a wonderful rest of your week. I will be back next week with a solid lineup through the month of October and through the rest of the year. So thank you for joining me on the celebratory 4-year celebration of Learning Tech Talks. And I will see you on the other side.